Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Gary Mrozinski of Luzerne County Community College, and this is Economics 152, Principles of Economics 2, Microeconomics. We also have a course called Economics 151, Principles of Economics 1. That's the macroeconomics course. And this course assumes that you've completed macroeconomics. If you have not, you're probably going to be okay. The first three chapters of this textbook, The Microeconomy Today by Schiller and Gebhardt, published by McGraw-Hill, the first three chapters are common to both the microeconomics course and the macroeconomics course. So this presentation, which will actually be in two parts, I'm calling it Chapter 1/2, takes topics from Chapters 1 and 2. We're not doing those chapters in their entirety, so just the concepts that will be important to your understanding of microeconomics. And so here we are, chapters 1 and 2. Again, this will be a review for you if you've taken our Economics 151 course already. Scarcity is the underlying assumption upon which all of economics is based. We have economic decisions to make because resources are scarce. Within an economy, productive resources are scarce, and so if you use your productive resources to produce more of one thing, you're producing less of another thing. And we're going to be looking at, in this course, the point of view of the individual business firm. And it's true there too. For an individual business firm, productive resources are scarce, and so you need to make economic decisions on the best uses of those resources. And on the part of the consumer, your resources are scarce as well. You don't have unlimited resources, so you make economic decisions all the time on how best to spend your money. Now, I prefer the term limited rather than scarcity. Resources are limited, and because resources are limited, we have economic decisions to make. And the reason that works better for me is because we could think of some very wealthy people like Bill Gates or Jeffrey Bezos, and you might not think that resources are scarce for those people, but they are limited, and they make economic decisions all the time for that reason. The factors of production are just different categories of resources. Again, within an economy, you need these resources to be able to produce, and of course, they can vary in quality. Labor, the most important resource, you need to have workers, and workers are limited. The number of workers you have are limited. Capital, remember in an economics class, capital is not money, although capital funds are funds that are used to purchase capital. When we speak of capital in an economics class, we're talking about the facilities that a business uses to produce their product. The facilities, so it could be a factory, manufacturing facility, it could be an office building, maybe the business is producing services like financial services. It's also all of the major equipment within the facility. So that would be major fixed equipment. Automation, if it's a manufacturing environment, automation also in services. And this includes computers and networking and telecommunications that are all fixed equipment within the facility. That's capital. Land, you need land for your capital to be planted on. And so land is important. Land is more important in producing some products than others. If you're producing agricultural products, it might be one of the most important, obviously. If you're producing banking services, it's not that important, or financial services. Think about how much land there is in Manhattan per millions of dollars of revenue generated. Not a lot of land, right? A small piece of land and a high-rise building that goes hundreds of stories in the air. So land is less important as a factor of production if you're producing something like financial services. Entrepreneurship, this is a special kind of labor service. You need some of the people in your labor force to be entrepreneurs, people that are very creative, people that have a higher tolerance for risk, people who are willing to go off on their own and risk their own resources and their own time to act on their own creative ideas and start a business and try to sell their product. The incentive for doing that is that the profits go to the entrepreneur, the profits go to the owner of the business. That doesn't happen when you're working for someone else. So the typical pathway is, and someone who's entrepreneurial goes to work for someone else, learns the business, has creative ideas that no one's paying attention to, and then strikes off on their own, becomes a competitor. This is good. This is where the innovation comes in an economy. So you need to have an economic system that rewards the entrepreneur. Now, economics is the study of how to best allocate limited resources among competing uses. So these are economic decisions that we make. And this is the field of economics. We're going to again be thinking in this class from the point of view of the individual business firm or the individual consumer, because we're drilling down into the demand curve and into the supply curve and thinking about individual decisions instead of looking at the overall macroeconomy as we did in the macroeconomics class. Remember that opportunity cost is a really important economic concept. It's one of the most important things. I think about this every day as I spend my time doing things, and how the story I like to tell is my son who plays soccer, youth soccer. It's the end of the day and he's just done with his soccer training, and he drinks a lot of Gatorade every day. Well, he drinks Gatorade. He even takes it to school to drink with his lunch, so we buy a lot of Gatorade, and I'm bringing him home. It's about 9:15, and we have a mini market that's a couple blocks from my house. I could stop there and buy a 32-ounce Gatorade. I'll probably need 2 of them, and spend $4 on the 2 bottles, or I can drive to Walmart, which is not that far away, but it probably takes me 7 minutes to get there, and pay $2 for half a gallon. So I can get really a whole gallon for $4 if I drive to Walmart. What do you do? I'll tell you what I do. It's 9:15. I'm tired. He's tired. We have to get ready for bed. We have to get ready for the next day. I probably pay the $4 for 2 32-ounce bottles. Why is that? Because I'm considering the opportunity cost of my time, what it would take me to drive 7 minutes one way, park my car. It's a super center, so I've got to walk through this large parking lot. I've got to walk all the way across the store to the other end, and then I've got to get in line. Maybe there's a line waiting to check out, and this whole thing could cost me 25 minutes, maybe 30 minutes even. Well, that's worth the $2 premium I would pay to buy the more expensive Gatorade in a more convenient location to save me from that extra 30 minutes of time. I'm thinking of opportunity cost. There are different types of economic systems currently across the world and across time. There are economic systems that are built on the principles of capitalism, which is private ownership of business firms. In that kind of a system, that's a market system economy on the left of your diagram here, that relies on the market mechanism to guide economic activity. On the other hand, you could have an economic system that's built on the principles of socialism, and if it's extreme socialism, that would be communism, and that's where the government owns the factors of production. The government owns the businesses that produce the goods and services. And again, this would be communism if the government owns all of the businesses within the economy. In that type of a system, command system economies, it's government directive that guides economic activity. Now, it's not really a yes or no question. It's really more like a continuum. It's degrees of capitalism versus degrees of socialism. You could be somewhere in the middle, which would be really what we consider today to be socialist economies, like in Western Europe, like France. They're not really government directive. Private companies produce plenty of goods and services in those economies, but the government does produce more than is the case in our economy. Now, even in our economy, our government produces goods and services. We produce defense services, our military, right? That's run by the government. We produce educational services, K through 12 education. That's produced by the government. We think that's important because that's such a fundamental right, we believe, that everybody has access to quality education, at least K through 12, that we can't trust it in the hands of private schools exclusively, because if a school was not profitable, that school just might go out of business. And we want for there to be access to public education everywhere, so our government does that, right? Well, what we consider to be socialist economies today expand that a little bit further, and the government may produce healthcare or fund healthcare, or maybe higher education, as you see in some, again, Western European economies. So it's degrees of capitalism versus socialism. It's also known as a mixed market economy when you're doing some of both, and that's what we have. Do you remember Adam Smith? Adam Smith is kind of like the original economist, or at least in the modern era. He was there at the birth of the Industrial Revolution. He was Scottish. Industrial Revolution began in England, as you recall, in the late 1700s. So this is the first modern economy that's based on the factory system of producing goods and services, producing in large facilities where people, it was the cottage system prior to that. People produced in small batches in their cottages. And now, usually wealthy people would build a factory. This is the business owners now, the capitalists. They would build a facility, a factory, and then hire the people to leave their cottages as employees of the factory. And there's all kinds of benefits. We talked about all of that in the macroeconomics class. Division of labor. You can purchase raw materials for lower costs. Efficient capital. It makes more sense to invest in a steam engine, for example, to drive factory equipment, whereas when you're trying to build something in your cottage, you can't afford something that expensive. So that led to innovations in technology. And anyway, this was the birth of the Industrial Revolution. He was watching this happen for the first time, and he was wondering, how involved should the government be? Is it okay that these wealthy capitalists seem to be in charge of the whole thing? The government is not in charge at all. And he came up with his famous invisible hand theory, which we'll talk about next. With the factory system of producing goods and services, there's all kinds of decentralized decision-making going on. On the demand side of the market, the consumer, when you're spending your weekly income, your scarce resources to buy whatever goods and services you buy that week, are you thinking about what's best for society? For the most part, no. Maybe there's a couple exceptions to that. You might want to buy green products or buy American products, I don't know. But for the most part, you're concerned with what you're going to benefit the most from. You have limited resources to spend. You want to maximize the total benefit or total utility you get from the combination of goods and services that you're purchasing. You are selfish. That's okay, Adam Smith would say, because on the other side of the market, you have the business firms who produce the products and bring them to market. They make up the supply of goods and services. They're also self-interested. They're not thinking, for the most part, about what's best for society. They're thinking about what maximizes profit. That is their primary objective, to maximize profits for the business owners. So these are decentralized decisions that are being made in most product markets. The government does not intervene and try to tell the business firms what the price needs to be or what to produce, and doesn't tell the consumer what to be buying. The government, for the most part, stays out of the operation of markets. And the question then would be, well, who is looking out for society? Adam Smith said, his invisible hand theory, that even though all this decentralized decision making is going on, the economy will be led as if by an invisible hand to lead to general economic prosperity and what's best for society. And the reason for that is all of the features of the market system economy, where the government is not intervening, and there will be more competition in product markets. This is the biggest thing. If business firms are competing with each other, that's good for the consumer, that's good for society. That will be more the case in a market system economy than is the case, say, in communism, where there may be 5 major auto manufacturing plants, and they're not really competing with each other, though. They're all government auto manufacturing plants, and the 5 plant managers don't even think of the other plants as competitors. We're all sort of on the same team. We're all part of the same company, all part of the same company, and so there's no real pressure to lower production costs, to come up with more innovative products. With competition, there is. You want to design a better product that better matches the needs and desires of the consumer. If you're doing that better than your competitors, you're going to increase your market share, make more money, you can charge a higher market price. There are none of these pressures in a command system economy, and so this is sort of the crux of the invisible hand theory, the market mechanism as compared to government directive. So features of the market mechanism or the market system economy. Efficiency, resources will be allocated based on society's wants. So think about across the whole system, the economic system. Who tells the automobile industry what to produce? With the market system economy, well, that's the consumer. If consumers want more pickup trucks, which is actually the case now, more pickup trucks and SUVs, we might see that turn around with rising gas prices, but that has been a 5-year trend or longer. More pickup trucks, well, then the auto manufacturer that's producing more and better pickup trucks is going to do better, and the market price for that kind of product will rise because there's increasing overall demand. Again, we look at this graphically in chapter 3, but that's the way it works, right? It's the consumer that tells the automotive industry how much to produce. Who tells the steel industry how much to produce or what to produce? That is a product that has derived demand. The demand for steel is derived from the demand for automobiles and the demand for commercial buildings. The construction industry buys steel to build big buildings. And if there's an increased overall demand for automobiles and for commercial buildings, there's an increased demand for steel, and that makes that market price go up. And so this is the way it works. The market mechanism in the command system economy, it's all led by the consumer. So productive resources are reallocated on their own. They become reallocated and they move into markets where society wants more of that product, because that makes the market price of that product go up. Whoever is producing and selling that product is making higher profits, and that's going to attract productive resources into that market. Where are the productive resources coming out of? Less profitable markets. What makes those markets less profitable? Buyers don't want those products as much as they do the other products. And so those producing those products are not as profitable. And so this is allocative efficiency when this happens within an economy. And the market mechanism does that better than communism or the command system economy, where it's the government trying to reallocate resources. There's all kinds of imbalances and surpluses and shortages. There's not productive efficiency. The consumer's not getting what they want. They're being told what's available, and sellers are being told what to produce, and they're issued production quotas, and meeting the production quotas is their primary objective, not innovating and controlling costs and building better products that consumers want. Now, laissez-faire capitalism is when remember I told you this is a continuum. It's not a yes or no question, really. Market mechanism versus government directive. It's more degrees of market mechanism, degrees of government directive. It's a continuum. You could be anywhere on a scale. Well, the far left of the scale, if you're looking at that diagram from 3 slides ago, which is where the government is the least involved, would be laissez-faire capitalism or laissez-faire economics. The government leaves it alone, hands off. Karl Marx and John Maynard Keynes, we'll be talking about them in the next couple of slides. They were 2 important economists that came after Adam Smith. Karl Marx becoming concerned about the wealth and power of the capitalists, who are the factory owners. This is at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and how they could exploit workers. And then after him came John Maynard Keynes, who also advocated for more government involvement, but not as much as Karl Marx. So we'll talk about those two now. Karl Marx, two famous books he wrote, Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. Again, he was concerned with the wealth and power of the capitalists who owned the factories, and how they could exploit the workers, who would make them toil long hours for subsistence wages. And this is before unions. And he was concerned about the outcome for society. Remember, this was something that the invisible hand theory addressed a little bit mysteriously. Who's looking out for society? Well, he became more concerned, and this is a few years into the Industrial Revolution now. It's happening in Western Europe in the first half of the 1800s. So there's a little bit more of a history now of the market system economy. And so Karl Marx, his intentions were honorable. What he misjudged, though, is, in his concern for the corruption on the part of the capitalists, and let's take power away from the capitalists and give that power to the government, because the government then will guarantee that the best interests of society are being served. What he misjudged was the potential for corruption on the part of government officials, because now it is government officials who have the power in that economy. Now, John Maynard Keynes was a British economist. He came later, and you can see he was born in the year that Karl Marx died. Now, he did his most important work in the early 1900s, when there was a Great Depression in the United States and elsewhere, which we talk a good bit about in the macro course. But the economists who were advising our president, Herbert Hoover, at the time in the U.S., at the beginning of the Great Depression, were classical economists who were saying, believing Adam Smith strictly, the government should not intervene. No, the system is flexible. It's a self-regulating system, this market system economy. The price will adjust to clear the market of surpluses and shortages. You just need to be patient. We should not intervene as a government. And so 1929, 1930, 31, 32, 33, and the stock market is crashing. People are losing their lifelong wealth, and banks are starting to collapse. Unemployment rate of 25%. Now it's 1934. And John Maynard Keynes is jumping up and down in England saying, the government can intervene. The government should intervene. There's things you can be doing. What's now known as Keynesian economics. What's now known as fiscal policy and monetary policy also. The government can step in, and if it's a recession, a depression is a severe recession, and stimulate the economy. And then there's what's called the multiplier process, which we learned about in the macro course. You don't need to fix the whole recession by spending government money. You just do a little bit of it, and then that sort of moves the economy in the right direction, and then the multiplier happens, and more spending happens, and that gets it moving in the right direction. There's different ways to do that, of course. That is Keynesian economics, when you believe the government should step in to alleviate market failures or to prevent them and sort of smooth out the business cycle so we don't have as wild swings. That is John Maynard Keynes, and that is what has been happening the last couple of years in our economy. Again, a mixed market economy is where you have private ownership of businesses, goods and services produced by privately owned companies, but you also have government intervention, and again, goods and services are produced by our government as well. So we have a mixed market economy, but again, it's a scale. You can be all the way to one end where there's minimal intervention on the part of the government, or all the way to the other end of the scale where there's the ultimate intervention on the part of the government. The government is the economy, or somewhere in between. So mixed market economies, if you are all the way in the direction, the diagram you saw earlier with market mechanism being on the left, so that's less government intervention. The further you are to the left on that scale, the higher you are on the index of economic freedom. So this is a list that's put together every year, and they look at, well, let's just go to the next slide. They look at all kinds of economic data, 50 different variables. So all of the economies of the world are ranked based on economic data that's available that measures 50 different criteria or variables. Their trade policy, how open are you to trade? So if you have trade barriers, then you'd be lower on the list. If you have minimal tariffs, you'd be higher on the list. Property rights, government intervention, and you can see we are not in the top 10. We were recently, 2 years ago. We slipped down, probably due to our trade policy and the changes made under the Trump administration. We are now number 17, so that dropped us lower on this list. So these are the most open economies, the most free market economies at the top of the list, the most capitalist economies. We have some history now available to us, which shows that since the Industrial Revolution, market system economies, market-reliant economies, where the government is not intervening, where it's private companies producing the goods and services, they grow faster than government-dominated economies like communism. And for all of the reasons we've already talked about, with a command system economy, there's no reward for being entrepreneurial, for innovating, because you can't own a business and the profits don't go to you. And so there's not the profit incentive, because an entrepreneur in the market system economy takes a risk. Not everybody can be an entrepreneur. You need to have a higher tolerance for risk. Not everybody needs to be an entrepreneur, but you need for your labor force to have entrepreneurs, because that's where the innovation is going to come from. And the only way someone who does have a higher tolerance for risk can be incentivized to act on their creative ideas and strike out on their own and start a business and try to sell their product, or just do it better than other businesses are doing it, is that they get the profits. It's the profit incentive. That doesn't exist with a command system economy. With a command system economy, or again, the more socialist you are, the more the government is producing, but taxes are going to be higher, so you have to recognize that. And that is the case in Western European economies compared to our economies. Even in the most capitalist economy, you need for the government to be performing certain roles. They need to provide a legal framework. You need to have a court of law. You need to have some sort of recourse for a business who has a contract in place for a vendor to be supplying raw materials or parts, and then if they pay the vendor and the vendor doesn't deliver, they've got to have some sort of legal framework to pursue that situation being rectified. You need to have laws in place, and you need to have laws for which there is not corruption. Protecting the environment. So we have a big discussion about this in the macro course. Do you think it costs something to have a clean environment? Well, one way to think about this, or to come to an answer for yourself, is imagine if we had no environmental regulation, no laws. Businesses would immediately be more profitable, right? It costs a business something to comply with environmental laws, to dispose of their waste in a responsible way or in the best way possible, or to limit their pollution. So they could be producing more GDP if we didn't have any environmental laws. But we think it's a good idea to have environmental laws, because part of our quality of life is how clean our environment is. Well, we need the government to do that for us, because the market system economy is not going to be doing that on its own. So what else do we need the government to do? Protect the consumers in various different ways. Product safety, unfair business practices on the part of businesses, which protects other businesses and also the consumer. Fostering competition, we have antitrust laws. The Sherman Antitrust Act and the Clayton Act are 100 years old and they're still used today. And the intent is to make sure that we don't have monopolies or even markets that are approaching monopoly where maybe mergers are happening which would reduce competition. The Federal Trade Commission can step in and prevent those from happening. And then protecting labor, OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration is an agency that enforces labor laws. There's FMLA, Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, Fair Labor Standards Act, which embedded in that is the Minimum Wage Act and also overtime provisions for hourly workers. They should be paid overtime if they work more than 40 hours a week within a certain annual salary level. And there's all kinds of labor laws embedded in that law. So we need the government to be protecting the worker. Now, a topic at the end of Chapter 1 is positive economics versus normative economics. Positive economics is when the analysis you're doing is saying that if the government increases the money supply, interest rates will go down. That would be an example of a positive economic statement, because you could prove or disprove that statement by collecting historical economic data that is available. And it doesn't have to be a true statement to be a positive economic statement. It could be false, but still, you could disprove then that statement by collecting historical data. Now, a normative economic statement might be more like the government should increase the money supply to improve the economy. That's more of a judgment or someone's opinion, and just the way it's stated. You can't really prove or disprove that statement, strictly speaking, by collecting data. It's when you're making a statement about what we should do, what should be done in the future. So the President's Council of Economic Advisors are normative economists because they're helping to advise the President on what we should be doing, what economic policy we should be pursuing. You've seen this before, the difference between macroeconomics and microeconomics. In macroeconomics, we're concerned with the macroeconomy, the national economy, and how it interacts with other national economies to form a global economy. Within any national economy, you can drill down a bit further and talk about industries or even product markets or resource markets within industries and think about the demand for the product, the supply of the product. We discuss all of that in macroeconomics, but we start at that level in microeconomics. We start at the product market level, and then we drill down further into the demand curve and the supply curve. What makes individual consumers, what influences their consumption decisions, how they're spending their money? And then on the supply side of the market, what is it that influences business firms as they make their production decisions? That's microeconomics. In economics, we construct economic models to learn about economic principles. A simple example of that, which we see in Chapter 3, is the law of demand. The law of demand says, as the price of the product goes up, the quantity demanded by buyers goes down. But we have to say, ceteris paribus, which means if nothing else changes. If nothing else changes but the price of the product and the price of the product goes up, then the quantity demanded will go down. We have to freeze all of the other variables that could be acting on the demand for this product in order to make that statement. Once we do that, we have made a simplifying assumption. That is the ceteris paribus assumption. So then we learn about the relationship between price and the quantity demanded, and then we extend that to the more complex reality. Whenever we do that, whenever we make these simplifying assumptions, we are constructing an economic model. And this is theory versus reality. We're trying to develop the theory that we can then extend or generalize to the real economy. Now, in Part B of this presentation, we're going to pick things up at the beginning of Chapter 2 and talk about some economic data which describes the U.S. economy and compares us to other parts of the world. And so I'll see you in part B.